Hello everyone, this is Rick and welcome to Astral Club. This is multiple dimensions and astral projection. A couple things I'd like you to do for me is check and see that you have a solid bell for this particular channel and not the empty one. The empty one only gives you occasional notifications. Solid bell you can select and hit all, and you'll get all the notifications for the Wednesday afternoon and the Saturday morning podcast. Also, if you like the video, hit the like button. That's much appreciated. When I often discuss astral projection, the word dimensions, comes up quite often. And I know many of us, if not all of us, have some idea, some clue as to what we're talking about or our own ideas of what we're talking about. But what I'd like to do is make this a very basic podcast in that I want to discuss the various dimensions, the second through the fifth, and try to make them as real as possible so you can so everyone can understand exactly what these dimensions are like and what their inherent limitations are, as well as what the pluses are about each of those dimensions. And so I think it'll help to put astral projection into a better context and perhaps explain or answer some of the questions that you may have had over the years about astral projection. Let's start with the second dimension. That's not something we think about very often. Of course, that's length and width. So in other words, if you take a piece of paper and you draw a line or lines on that paper, essentially those lines are existing in two dimensions. They have length and they have width, but no height. They're second dimension. I'd like you to imagine for a moment that there is a civilization, a race, a life form that exists in only two dimensions. That those lines you drew on paper actually became an intelligent, self-aware race of beings. You, I guess, in essence, would be their unknowable creator. Since you're in three dimensions, they might have legends of you and myths and what have you, but they would struggle to understand exactly what this greater being was like because it would be so far outside of their realm of experience. All they see is length and width. A three-dimensional being would not be visible or discernible to a two-dimensional being. Of course, there probably would be stories. They might even have tabloids where they would publish ghostly sightings of supposed three-dimensional beings. And people would laugh at those people and make fun of them and say, oh, they probably live in trailer parks and they were drunk at the time. Because everyone knows there's only two dimensions. Because in their world, everything they know, everything they observe, all of their science would be around the basic assumption that there are two dimensions and that's it. So two-dimensional beings can obviously see one another in two dimensions. But third-dimensional beings, let alone fourth or fifth, would be completely unknowable to them. It would be outside of their realm of experience, the breadth of their knowledge, imagination would be confined within those two dimensions. Now let's go to the dimension that I think we all understand the best, which is the third dimension. Of course, length, width, and height. This is our world. This is the universe that our scientists explore. Of course, we can see two-dimensional items because we're in a higher dimension. From the third dimension, we can quite easily see the second dimension, even though they would be unable to see us. So in this third dimensional world, we would say, well, everything that exists based on our observation, based on our science, is based on the assumption that the existence of the universe, the world, our race, and perhaps other races would all exist within those three dimensions. Now, of course, just like my hypothetical two-dimensional friends, we have legends of people seeing the past, the future, glimpses of them while they're in their third dimensional state. We have people reporting a wide variety of ghostly sightings. And of course, there's lots of legends and myths, and science, much like the science of the second dimension. Our science here in the third dimension mostly dismisses these experiences because they are outside of the accepted realm of knowledge. We're third dimensional. We're the only thing that exists. We're the only way that you can observe intelligence in our universe. However, I'd like to suggest that third dimensional beings who think like I just indicated are every bit as myopic as those second dimensional beings who didn't believe that anything existed outside of their world. Now let's go to the fourth dimension. Now the fourth dimension is time. When you astral project, especially once you get out of the lower levels of the astral, you have the ability to travel through time. You can observe a variety of times. Because when you're in the fourth dimension, you realize fairly soon that time, at least as the way that people in the third dimension define it, as in there was the past, it no longer exists. There's the present, it currently exists. And then there's the future, which hasn't happened yet. You realize that that is a fallacy, that it is wrong on all levels. You realize in the fourth dimension that all time is happening at exactly the same moment. It's just a matter of frequency. It's like, for instance, you have a TV. Well, when I was a kid, we only had a handful of channels. We're like, what are you going to watch? 3, 6, or 10? Now you've got hundreds and hundreds of channels and still nothing to watch. But, you know, they all exist at the same time. You're watching one program, but there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other programs that are going on at the same time. The only thing that limits your ability to perceive them is the limitations of your third dimensional physical form. Now, imagine yourself now in the astral, in the fourth dimension, where you have access to all time. You can literally access any moment throughout Earth's history, or for that matter, history anywhere else in the universe. And history also means the future, okay? Because it's all happening at the same time. Now, to the average folks in the third dimension, this seems ludicrous. It seems impossible. It seems counterintuitive. But keep in mind that all of those fancy words are exactly what the second dimension race would say about the hypothetical third dimension. So people in the fourth dimension, entities in the fourth dimension, have access to the timeline as it exists in this universe. And of course, they can perceive the third dimension and they can perceive the second dimension. However, those in the second and third dimension have extreme difficulty, if not impossibility, to perceive what's going on in the fourth dimension. And that's why astral projection is so amazing, because it grants you that ability while you're currently existing inside a third dimensional body. So I think that explains a lot of the experiences that I've had when I travel, when I astral project. And I'm still to this day puzzled as to why, when people talk about astral projection, they don't talk more about time travel. I mean, I discovered that back in the 70s after I read Robert Monroe's book and I started thinking about time travel. And I started wondering, why wouldn't that be possible? The more I studied physics and what would be involved in a hypothetical fourth dimension, it seemed to me that time travel would have to occur. It would have to be possible. And so when I started experimenting, because I couldn't find anything in books about astral or anything else about time travel, I eventually stumbled upon a way to make that happen and to travel through the time of Earth, past, present, future, as well as other planets. So like I said, I'm surprised that other books, other astral projectors don't spend more time on that. I mean, perhaps they just never thought of it. I mean, I'll admit that you guys leave comments and requests all the time saying, "Hey, did you ever do this?" And it never occurs to me that no, I never did think about doing that. Perhaps I'll stick it on my enormous list of places and times that I'd like to visit. Let's talk now about the fifth dimension. Now, this one is the most difficult to describe. And another word for the fifth dimension might be the mental plane. And if you recall, I made perhaps one of my most difficult podcasts describing the several experiences I had on the mental plane. I say difficult because describing things that happen on the astral plane in English, like for instance, idents and passing thought rotes back and forth telepathically, you have to try your best to use English words that are woefully inadequate to the task at hand. But I do my best. And I think I do a pretty decent job. And certainly folks like Monroe and other famous writers have done a pretty good job as well. Probably a lot better than I have. But the mental plane was by far the most difficult. In fact, I put off doing a video or a podcast about the mental plane for a long time because I just, like, every time I would think about doing it, I'd have to rack my brain, try to figure out how I'm going to put this experience into some coherent form that someone who's never experienced it would actually get something out of it, would understand what I was saying, instead of just thinking that I was just talking a bunch of gobbledygook, a bunch of disconnected words and phrases, which made no sense. So it was very difficult, and I finally did it. And if you haven't seen it, Astralclub, the mental plane, I'll probably put a link in the description, maybe even in the comment section, I don't know. Either way, look one of those places if you haven't seen that one yet, because I think it was a pretty good one. And I haven't seen a lot of interesting podcasts about the fifth dimension, so check it out if you haven't. But let's talk a little bit more about the fifth dimension now, just in general. I'm not going to get into all those details again. The fifth dimension is a dimension where all time, all space is available for exploration, but not just this reality, but all realities, all parallel universes are accessible from the fifth dimension. And even more interesting, it is possible, using your mental abilities on this fifth dimension, to change things. To say, what if Abraham Lincoln had not been assassinated on that April day in 1865? How would the history of the United States, or perhaps the world, have progressed. And you can do that. You can watch that plane as it might have existed. Keep in mind, it may not be one of the possibilities that actually exist out there, the parallel universes, the multiverse, if you will. But you can do that just by mental exercise. You can make any change you want. You can make a change to the future. As interesting as that sounds to somebody sitting here in the third dimension listening to me ramble on. So the fourth dimensional beings cannot perceive the fifth dimensional beings. Now, occasionally there is a sighting, but it's every bit as apocryphal as the second dimensional race would be of seeing third dimensional beings, or of third dimensional beings seeing those fourth dimensional beings. So the fifth dimension is an extremely, it was a good music group, but it's an extremely fascinating place. And it's one, as I said, that's probably the hardest to grasp for us, because it seems to be violating all of the laws of physics, perhaps not quantum physics, but everything else. But that is the way it is. And that is the basic differences and the basic realities of the second, third, fourth, and fifth dimensions. Now, I have read about realities existing in higher dimensions above the fifth. However, if I haven't experienced something, I'm not comfortable talking about it. Just because I read about it in some Tibetan Book of the Dead or Egyptian Book of the Dead or some other book written by perhaps an insane individual, perhaps a genius. But I'm not going to sit there and vomit that out because if I haven't experienced it, I can't really sit here and sign off on it. So that is my understanding of those second, third, fourth, and fifth dimensional realities. And I hope this was of interest to you. If so, please do hit the like button. Make sure you got a solid bell so you're notified every time, Wednesday afternoon and Saturday morning, when a new podcast comes out. And I'd be very interested in your questions and comments. And as always, this is Rick, currently in the third dimension for now, and I will see you on the astral plane.